Hi, I'm Jess. We're here aboard the Schooner SoundWaters in Long Island Sound. We use the Schooner, which is an 80-foot sailboat with 3 masts and 4 sails, to explore all over the Sound. Today we're going to be talking all about the benthic organisms, or those organisms that live down at the bottom. We're going to be doing a trawl with our special trawl net we'll talk about in a few minutes, and then we'll go into some of the body systems and different adaptations these animals have to help them survive here. We're going to start our adventure by deploying our trawl net. So our trawl net goes off the back of the schooner, and it drags along the bottom, and it collects all the animals that live down there. This is a little model. You see up here, along the top, we have little floats, represented by these beads. That keeps the mouth of the net floating. And then at the bottom, there's something called the tickle chain. And the tickle chain will bring all the animals that are down at the bottom and scoot them up so they get caught by our net. Then at the very end of our net, we have something called the cod end. And this is where all the animals caught by the net collect, so when we bring them up onto the boat, we can check them out. My friends Captain Vigi and Christina were setting the net up, now ready to deploy it. All right, we had our trawl net out for 10 minutes. Let's see what we caught. First, we caught a ton of comb jellies. We caught 2 small, long fin squids. We caught a spider crab. We caught some baby porgy or scup. We also caught a baby black sea bass. Little black sea bass, and a flounder. All of these animals we caught fit into something called a food chain. Do you know what a food chain is? My friend Nicola and I will teach you all about it.
Hi, I'm Nicola.
And I'm Jess.
And today we're going to be learning about the food chain. We're going to spend a little time here, and then we're going to be taking a field trip to the Long Island Sound to see what we can find. When an animal moves, like a fish swims or a rabbit jumps, it needs energy to do so.
How does it get that energy?
Well, good question. It gets that energy by eating, just like we do. So, we have here a food chain. Now, this food chain is in a triangle. That's because, a lot of times, at the bottom of our food chain is where the most animals live. And then, as we move up the food chain, there are fewer and fewer animals.
We're going to start off by talking about the very bottom of the food chain. These animals are called producers. A producer is a type of animal that can make its own food. So it uses energy from the sun and nutrients from the environment around it to create its own food. And that is the basis of our food chain. So that's where all of the energy in the ecosystem begins.
And a lot of these examples are things like plants and, in the Long Island Sound, seaweed. Our next level are our consumers. The first type of consumer that we're going to talk about are herbivores. Herbivores eat our producers. So think of a cow. A cow has special adaptations in its stomach in order to digest plant material. Things like herbivores are super important because they're going to eat everything at that base level in order for it to travel up through to the top level of our food chain.
An example of an herbivore in Long Island Sound might be a fish. They like to eat plant material also. The next type of consumer we're going to talk about is
the predator. So we're going to be talking about things that eat our herbivores.
So these things are called carnivores. So carnivores don't get their energy directly from producers. They get them from the other consumers that eat the producers. So they're eating other animals. So an example of that would be maybe a turtle. So we have special turtles in Long Island Sound that love to swim around and gather all the different fish that they can find.
But some animals are not adapted to hunt their own food like our turtles are. Some of them aren't able to eat with teeth, and they don't have claws in order to catch their food, so they have to resort to other ways of doing this. So, different types of carnivores are consumers. We have decomposers.
Decomposers are super important because they actually break down all the material that's at the bottom of the sound. So they'll break down plants, they'll also break down dead animals, like maybe if they found a leftover fish from a different animal's food, they would break down all that material so that a lot of trash and junk doesn't end up down at the bottom of the sound and make it all dirty.
Yep. And another type of animal that eats other animals but doesn't have the means to do so, like our carnivores, are our scavengers. Our scavengers are going to eat leftover or dead things anywhere in the ecosystem. So a type of scavenger on land is something like a vulture. A vulture is going to eat things that are left over on the side of the road. In the Long Island Sound, a great example of a scavenger is a horseshoe crab.
Now that we've learned about how the food chain works, let's go out to the Long Island Sound and see what we can find. We're standing here on the shoreline of Long Island Sound at SoundWaters Coastal Education Center in Cove Island Park in Stamford, Connecticut. We're going to start off at the bottom of our food chain. If you look at these two waters, this one's clear and this one's a little bit green. Do you know why it's green? It's actually green because there's phytoplankton. Phytoplankton are at the bottom of our food chain and they're pretty much water plants. So they're tiny microscopic plants and they are a producer. So that's why they're at the bottom of our food chain. They take the sun's light and nutrients from the water to produce their own food. If we were to put the green water underneath the microscope, this is what we would see. These are all of our phytoplankton. They're a bunch of different shapes and sizes, but they all do the same thing. So they capture that sun's energy and they create their own food that other animals then eat as we go up the food chain.
Our next type of animal on our food chain is our first type of consumer. This consumer is an herbivore. These are bivalves. These are going to eat all of those phytoplankton that we just spoke about. The phytoplankton being plants and herbs being plants kind of gets you an idea of what an herbivore is. It's an animal that eats plants. These are bivalves and they have two different shells. Bi means two. Valve is a special scientific word for shell. These shells help them survive in the intertidal zone where they live. The intertidal zone is somewhere where there's a lot of water at some points and no water at other points. Their shells close when there's no water, and this traps in all of the water that they need to survive until the next tide. This is an oyster. An oyster can filter about 1.3 gallons of water per hour, and this works out to about 30 gallons of water per day. That's a lot of water. Oysters filter up to 30 of these every single day. And they do that by using two different types of siphons. One siphon sucks in the water, where they filter out all of those plankton, and then the other one expels or gets rid of the water that it just consumed. As they filter out the plankton, they're also doing something really important for the Long Island Sound. They're cleaning it. They can take out pollutants while they're filtering out phytoplankton, which is really important for us and the animals.
The next animal on our food chain is our second consumer. That's this guy. This is a sea star. Sea stars are a little bit different than the bivalves because instead of eating plants, they eat other animals. So they're called a carnivore. And what they do to eat their other animals is really cool. So on the bottom of their body, they have a bunch of little suction cups. These little tube feet, they're called. And they use water to power those. With their suction cups, they're able to stick to rocks on the bottom of the sound or onto their prey. And what they like to do is really, really weird. On the bivalve, they're very patient. So they sit and wait on here until the bivalve starts to open up so that he can get some water to eat. Then the sea star sticks some of his little tube feet, his little suction cups inside to hold the clam open. Then he does something really weird with his stomach, which is actually inside his mouth. His mouth is down here on the bottom. What he does is he takes his stomach outside of his body. He puts it inside the clam and then he digests the clam outside. So imagine if you had to take your stomach out, throw it onto your sandwich at lunch, smash it all up and swallow it back whole. So what they do is called external digestion because they're digesting all of their food outside their body. What we do is called internal digestion because everything we digest is inside.
Some animals aren't born hunters. This animal here, the horseshoe crab, doesn't have sharp teeth or sharp claws or anything to help it catch its food. So it's going to eat animals that have been left over by other animals or animals that are already dead. This is called a scavenger. Now, let's see what happens when we give him a piece of food. So he has a lot of really awesome adaptations. One of these adaptations are the bristles in his mouth. The bristles in his mouth help him mash up his food so that they go right down into his body. His mouth also happens to be right in the middle of his body so that his legs can help push that food even further down. He also has little tiny claws right above his mouth that help funnel that food into his stomach. These are called chelicerae. And chelicerae make him actually more related to spiders and scorpions than other types of crabs.
So this next animal we're going to mention is actually a decomposer. So these guys you'll find on the bottom of Long Island Sound. They're mud snails. Anytime you go to the beach, you might see them walking around. And a decomposer breaks down all the dead material, like dead animals and dead plants, and it pretty much cleans up the bottom of the water. If you think about it at your house, if you didn't throw away your trash, your place would get pretty messy. These guys help to clean up Long Island Sound so that the dead material doesn't make the water all dirty. The Long Island Sound food chain contains so many different animals, all the producers, consumers, and decomposers. What do you think would happen if we removed one of those levels from our food chain?
Take the sea star, for example. We already talked about it. Do you remember what it ate? It ate those bivalves, so clams, mussels, and oysters. If you look around me, we have shells scattered everywhere right now. These are clam shells. Now, there's one predator that also likes to eat clams, and that's the seagull. They dive deep down, bring them up, drop them onto a dock, and then they eat what's inside. Why do you think this might be a problem? Well, it could be a problem because if they eat all of the bivalves, these sea stars are so used to eating bivalves that they would have no food left, and so the sea stars might not survive. The other thing that would happen is that we would have a surplus of our phytoplankton. There would be so much phytoplankton because it's not being balanced out by its predators.
The Long Island Sound food chain is a balancing act. Predators keep the prey population in check, and prey can only sustain a certain number of predators. If one thing is removed, or something is harmed by a disease or by pollution, it can have a huge effect on the whole Long Island Sound food chain. It's so important to make sure you protect all the small animals and the large animals. Now that we've met some Long Island Sound animals and learned about what they eat, I wonder how they digest their food. Do you think sea stars and flounder do it the same way? Here's a video of my friend Nicole and I talking all about it. Living is hard and requires a lot of energy. Organisms get their energy in a bunch of different ways. If you think about trees or grass, they make their own energy from the sun's light. Can animals do that? Nope. Animals like us need to eat. When we eat, all of our food comes into our body and gets broken down into smaller pieces that our body can use. And that's done by our digestive system. Do you think all animals digest their food in the same ways? Nope. If you think about what you had for lunch, I know I had peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Now, the way I digest this is going to be a little bit different than how a goose would digest his lunch. He probably didn't have peanut butter and jelly. Probably had a nice salad of some grass. So this grass will be digested a little bit differently than my body will digest my peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So what we're going to do today is dive into some of the systems in the organisms we find in Long Island Sound.
Let's dive into the digestive system of a sea star. If we take a look at a sea star, it has a really simple body plan, right? It doesn't have any fingers or anything like we do, but it has a complex digestive system. Now, if we were to eat something as big as what the sea stars eat compared to their body size, like this clam here, that would be the equivalent of us eating like an elephant. That's a lot. But sea stars are able to do this because they have two stomachs. And the first stomach is in charge of going into their food, like this clam here, and digesting the clam inside its own two shells. And this way, they can eat food that's much bigger than they are, unlike us. Once the first stomach is done partially digesting that huge clam that it stuck itself into, it's then time for the second stomach to take all of that food and distribute it throughout the sea star's body. And it actually stores this food inside its arms where it has digestive glands to help break it down even further. Once it's all broken down, then the sea star poops it out. And we have to make sure that we don't interrupt a sea star when it's eating because it takes a really, really long time for their full digestion to occur.
Now this guy doesn't eat anything too hard. It's a scavenger. So they walk around and they eat pretty much whatever that they can find on the bottom. After the food gets in their mouth, it actually travels to another section called the crop. And the crop is responsible for grinding up their food. Since they don't have any teeth, they can't really break it down very well. Sometimes they do like to eat things like snails and stuff like that, and the crop can't grind up the shell. So if there's little pieces of extra shell inside, they actually spit it back out their mouth. After the crop goes on to the rest of their digestive system, and then eventually they excrete any waste out as poop.
Our last friend is the flounder. Now the flounder is a carnivore, which means that it eats meat. And the way that we can tell it eats meat is by looking at its teeth. If we took a closer look at the flounder's mouth, we would see that it looks something like this. Its teeth aren't blue, of course, but they're sharp and jagged and kind of offset. And this tells us that he likes to eat flesh because those pointed teeth can rip into things. Now, if we took a look at an herbivore's teeth, or something that eats plant material like algae and seaweed, you'd see that it doesn't have those sharp teeth because it doesn't need them to tear off material as much as the flounder does. Another difference between herbivores and carnivores is the length of their intestines. So a carnivore like our flounder has a very small intestine because it's easy to break down that flesh into usable substances. But an herbivore has a very long intestine because it's harder to break down plant material because it's more fibrous. And flounder are known as ambush predators. What does it mean to ambush someone?
To surprise attack!
To surprise attack someone. So a flounder will lie in wait, and then when it's ready, it'll surprise its prey, eat it, go back down, and then it digests it. And when it's done digesting things through its intestines, it's released as waste.
As fish grow, they tend to eat things that are bigger. So they'll eat small things when they're little, and then bigger and bigger things as they grow up. Flounder are a little bit different. They actually don't eat anything bigger. They eat a lot more of them. So once a flounder is about 6 inches long, they start to eat the same thing they would as an adult. The adults just eat a ton more. They actually have to eat 4 to 8% of their body weight every day. So if you think about that, if you weighed 100 pounds, it means you need to eat 4 to 8 pounds of food every single day. So that's like going to the restaurant and eating a ton of burgers. It'd be a lot of food. Today we talked about the digestive system of the sea star, horseshoe crab, and flounder.
We learned about some of the unique features that each of these animals have to help break down that food and provide energy to live.
I didn't know sea stars had 2 stomachs, or that flounder had to eat so much food. I can't imagine having to eat 8 pounds of food every day. After an animal's digestive system breaks down all the food, it has a ton of nutrients in its body. I wonder how it moves them around. Nicole and I did some research, and we want to share with you what we found. Whew. Every time I go for a run, it really makes me appreciate my circulatory system. Do you know why? Without a circulatory system, I wouldn't be able to move. What it does is it transports nutrients and gases all throughout my body to make sure my cells have what they need. And cells are called the building blocks of life because every living organism is made up of them. Some organisms are only one cell. Other things like us have lots of cells. We actually have 30 trillion, and we're not even the biggest animals out there.
When an animal's body moves, it uses oxygen from its cells to help it do so, which is why when we move really fast, we breathe harder, because our body's trying to replenish the oxygen that we're using. And we have 30 trillion cells, so our body has to be really efficient at doing that. You can think of your circulatory system as the plumbing in your home. It pumps up fresh water for you to use in your shower, let's say, and you use it, and then the same plumbing takes away the wastewater. Well, your body does the same thing. Your heart is the pump that we were just talking about, and instead of pumping water, it pumps blood, as you know. And all of that blood goes to different areas in your body, bringing oxygen-rich cells. And then the same system takes them away. And as we're looking at, or as you're watching this right now, your heart is beating all by itself. You don't have to think about it. And that's because it's called an involuntary muscle. It moves all on its own.
Animals with a spine, like reptiles, birds, and mammals like us, have something called a closed circulatory system. So that means all of our blood is enclosed inside of tubes. These tubes are called blood vessels, and there are 2 different kinds. There are veins and arteries. Arteries are the ones that take the blood that has oxygen from our heart to the rest of our body, and then veins take the blood from the tissues in our body back to the heart to get oxygenated again. And it's a cycle, so it just keeps going around and around. If you took all of the blood vessels inside of an elementary school student and laid them out single file in one line, you could wrap it around the earth 2 times. It'd be 60,000 miles long. It's pretty crazy. But there are some animals that have something called an open circulatory system, like this horseshoe crab here. He doesn't have any blood vessels inside of its body. Instead, the blood is kind of just floating around in there. It has a heart that pumps it around, but it's much easier for him to circulate his blood because he doesn't have any tubes. His organs are able to take the oxygen straight out of the blood around his body, and then it's much easier for him He doesn't have to use as much energy to circulate all of the blood around.
All right, so let's see the difference in energy that you need in a closed circulatory system versus an open circulatory system. So Jess is going to be representing our open circulatory system. So she's not going to have anything like veins in her demonstration. And mine is the closed circulatory system. So I have a long tube that's going to represent a vein. Let's see which one of us can use up all of our blood first. You ready, Jess?
Ready.
All right, let's go.
Done.
Jess is already done, and I'm still pumping mine through. Oh, there we go. So she had a lot less energy that she needed to use in order to get all the blood into her system. Took me a little bit longer. So if it takes less energy for something with an open circulatory system to get blood through its system, then why don't all animals have open circulatory systems? Well, when you saw our horseshoe crab friend, he was a very round shape. He has a simple body plan. This means that it's easier for him to get all the blood throughout his body. Now we have appendages, like fingers and stuff like that, and that takes us longer to get blood to those areas, and it would also be a lot harder if we didn't have vessels to get them there.
We all know that blood is that important red stuff inside our body that carries around all the nutrients and oxygen we need. Blood is actually made up of two different things, plasma and blood cells. Plasma is pretty much water, and blood cells are three different kinds. The first kind are red blood cells, and they're the reason that our blood is red. When they come into contact with oxygen, they have something called iron inside them that binds to it. And when iron comes into contact with oxygen, it turns red. Kind of like on the rust you can see here. It's kind of reddish in color. And they carry the oxygen all over our body that we need. They also take away some of the waste products too. Another kind of blood cell we have are white blood cells. White blood cells are kind of like the security guards of our body. And what they do is they defend us against illness. So they'll attack different viruses and things that get inside of our bodies to make sure that we stay nice and safe and healthy. And we also have something called platelets. Platelets are kind of like handymen. So what they do is if you get a cut, you don't keep bleeding, right? Your cut clots. And that's the platelets. What they do is they repair, they bind together, and they fix us so that we don't just keep bleeding. But those platelets can't detect bacteria that could get into our cuts. There is an animal that has blood that can do that, though.
Horseshoe crabs have really unique blood, and their blood is blue. This is because instead of iron like we have in our red blood cells, they have copper, and copper, in the presence of oxygen, turns blue. So they're true blue bloods. Now, we have three different types of blood cells in our body. We have those red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets, but the horseshoe crab only has one blood cell in its body, and it's called an amoebocyte. And the amoebocyte is really good at doing something. It's really good at detecting viruses and infections inside the blood of the horseshoe crab. And the way it does this is it clots around the foreign body or the invader, just like milk kind of curdles. So we're gonna take a look and see what that looks like. So this green vial here has our seawater in it. And our seawater has something that could hurt the horseshoe crab. Let's say it's a bacteria. And this is our horseshoe crab blood. Now, if we put some of the seawater into our horseshoe crab blood, what do you think is going to happen? We're going to find out. So as we drop the seawater into the vial of horseshoe crab blood, we can see this kind of milky layer appears on the top of the blood. This is that clotting factor. And this happens within the horseshoe crab's body 24/7, which makes them really good at surviving. Now this is just a chemical representation of what would happen inside a horseshoe crab. This is actually just water mixed with a chemical. Same thing with the seawater.
Today we learned all about circulatory systems and what they do for the animals that have them.
While they might not look the same in all of these animals, the delivery systems are really important to keeping the animals alive and healthy.
Aren't horseshoe crabs so cool? The way their blood can clot around bacteria when it gets inside. It's a pretty amazing adaptation that helps keep them safe. Did you see all of his legs when I was holding him? They moved around like crazy. It made me think about how animals that live in the water can move around. My friends Tim and Christina are here to tell us all about it.
Hi, I'm Christina.
Hi, I'm Tim.
And today we're going to learn all about the adaptation, aquatic movement. And then we're going to head outside for a field trip to the Long Island Sound. Aquatic movement is an important adaptation for many reasons. Migration, them finding their predators or prey, and also for mating. We're going to look at 4 different animals and how they all move differently. The first one is the crustacean. Here we have a picture of a blue crab. We're going to go outside later on and see different forms of crustaceans. The blue crab is really interesting because their back leg right here is called a swimmerette, which helps them to actually swim in the water. The next one, we have a bivalve and univalve. Bivalve means two-shelled animal, such as a mussel. A univalve is a one-shelled animal, such as a snail. Bivalves usually don't move around too much, but they do have a muscular foot, which is really cool. It comes out of the muscle and helps them to move around slowly. Univalves, they move on a mucus raft.
Our next group is reptiles. The one on the board here is an alligator. Many of you may be familiar with the alligator. They move really slowly on land because they don't have big legs, but they have a great tail for swimming in the water. There are many other examples of reptile movement. If you think about snakes, they're legless and they actually slither. The other group we're going to be talking about is fish. Fish, again, all different kinds of movement methods, and it really depends on where they live in the water, what things they eat, and how far they need to swim. The first fish we're going to take a look at is the flounder. Now the flounder is pretty unique because they live on the bottom. The flounder also is completely flat. They have two eyes on the top of their head as opposed to one eye on either side. And instead of swimming side to side like this, they swim up and down. So when they're very young, they actually start off like regular fish with one eye on either side, swimming side to side. Very early on in their lives, they flip over. They start swimming like this, and the eye on the bottom migrates to the top of their head. This is really important in the way that they get food, which we'll learn about later. The next fish we're going to talk about is the sea robin. So the sea robin's another kind of strange one. They again live on the bottom, but they are called the sea robin because they have these big pectoral fins that are like wings. That helps them to glide through the water really easy, and they're very agile. They also have these little projections, tiny little finger-looking fins that come down from the top of their head that actually allow them to walk on the bottom, which again helps them to get their food. The last fish we're going to take a look at is the oyster toadfish. Another bottom fish, but a completely different bottom plan from the other two. So the oyster toadfish barely moves. He doesn't need to move because he eats oysters. So his body's not really great at swimming. He's actually extremely clumsy, and he has a hard time getting any other food.
Now that we've learned all about aquatic movement, let's go out to the Long Island Sound and see what we can find.
Here we are at SoundWaters Coastal Education Center on Cove Island Park in Stamford, Connecticut. And right now I'm hanging out with my friend, the diamondback terrapin. The diamondback terrapin is a turtle native to Long Island Sound, and what you'll be able to see here is how quickly these guys are able to move through our salt marsh. So not only is this an animal that's adapted to be able to move in the water because of their webbed feet and their sharp nails that they use to climb on slippery surfaces, they can also move quickly on land.
Hi, I'm at a tidal pool here on the shores of Long Island Sound. Tidal pools are formed when the high tide comes in. Water gets trapped when the low tide starts going out. Here we have a spider crab and a lobster. Let's take a closer look at these. Here we have a spider crab. They have 8 legs, 4 on each side. Most of their legs are used for moving sideways. These crabs are one of the only crabs that could actually move forward and backwards also. Here we have our lobster. She has 4 legs on each side called walking legs, which are used for walking. She also has this really awesome tail, which can be called the abdomen. She flexes her muscles in her abdomen and helps her move away a lot faster by moving backwards away from predators or to catch prey.
Here we are at the Rocky Intertidal Zone. We're going to go take a look at how our univalves and our bivalves move. Here's one of our local bivalve species, the clam. This clam is called the quahog, and like the mussel that we learned about inside, they have a muscular foot. Usually we can't see our clams because they're dug down deep into their holes. They use their muscular foot to dig into their hole, and they're really only able to move up and down.
Mud snails also live here in the Rocky Intertidal Zone. They also move with a muscular foot just like the clam and the mussel we saw inside. Except these mud snails move on a mucus raft, which is a thin line of mucus. They don't move that quick, so the currents easily sweep them up, and which could be beneficial to find different food or to escape a predator.
So today we learned all about aquatic movement in 4 different groups of animals. We saw crustaceans move with the lobster and the spider crab. reptiles with our diamondback terrapin, fish with our oyster toadfish and our flounder, and we also saw mollusks with our clams and our mud snail.
I never realized how many ways animals have adapted to moving. That diamondback terrapin was so cool. I always thought turtles were really slow, but she moved so fast. How do you think she can tell where she's going? Can animals that live in the water hear and see like we do? Tim and Christina are experts on animal senses. Let's go hear from them.
Today we're going to learn all about the 5 senses animals use to adapt to their environment. They use these 5 senses to escape predators, find prey, migration, hibernation, all different sorts of adaptations. The first one we're going to look at is taste. Here we have a picture of a catfish. The catfish has 175,000 taste buds all over their body. A human only has 10,000. They can use their taste buds to sense the type of water, whether it's brackish, fresh, or salt, all different sorts of things. Next up we have hearing.
So the moth has adapted to have really good hearing. Hearing is important to an animal like the moth because, as you may know, they're hunted by bats. Bats use echolocation, and in order to avoid getting eaten, moths really need to have good hearing.
Next up we have smell. We have the great white shark right there. Do you ever wonder why the great white shark is one of the best predators? It's because it uses all 5 senses to be the most effective at catching its prey. It uses its nose, which has 2 nostrils just like ours, and the water will go up the left side and not the right side, and they could determine what direction their prey is in. Really cool stuff. Next up is touch. Here we have the manatee. The manatee has little tiny hairs all over their body where they could sense water composition, they could which the current is coming from, all different sorts of things. They even use their flippers as hands and can manipulate objects like we can.
The last animal we have uses sight very heavily. This is the mantis shrimp. Mantis shrimp have these really advanced eyes that you can see here that are able to see all different kinds of things. This is really important for the mantis shrimp because they rely on really fast movements to catch their prey. If they don't have really good eyes, it's going to be very hard for them to get what they need to eat. 2 examples of Long Island Sound animals that rely very heavily on some of their senses are 2 of our fish here. We have the sea robin and the northern kingfish. They kind of have similar adaptations with these weird little parts of their fins that they actually use to kind of feel for animals in the water. So the sea robin has several, and they look like fingers. And not only do they feel in the sand for animals to eat, they also actually kind of taste the sand. So it's a combination of both feel and taste. Similar on our northern kingfish, except his is what we call a barbell, and it's a little piece on the chin, and it does the same thing as a sea robin where it not only feels, but it can also sense animals underneath the sand. Now that we learned all about our 5 animal senses, let's head outside to go sailing and find some examples of animal senses in the Long Island Sound. We're here at SoundWaters Coastal Education Center, Cove Island Park, Stamford, Connecticut, and behind me is Holly Pond. In front of me is a seine net. This is a net commonly used in population studies by scientists. What we're going to do today is we're going to use it to find some of our local animals and see what kind of different senses that they use in our environment.
We caught a lot of cool things here on our seine net, one of them being the sea star. The sea star has 5 arms. On the tip of each of their arms is an eye. They don't have the best eyesight. They only have these tiny eyes that see light and dark, so like a shadow. So if you close your eyes and wave your hand in front of your face like this, that's how the sea star sees all the time, which makes it hard for them to find their food. Underneath, they have thousands of tiny tube feet. Those tube feet help them move and stick to things. They'll come out and they'll wiggle around, but if you touch them, they'll retract right back inside. So they are sensitive to touch.
This is the channeled whelk. A channeled whelk is a carnivorous species of snail, meaning that they eat other animals. This particular snail has 2 really long antennae that they use to sense different things around them. One of the antennae is used to see light, almost like a primitive eye, and the other antenna is used to kind of taste the water around them to make sure they're in safe water. The horseshoe crab is a really well-adapted animal that's been on the planet for a very long time. They have several different features on their body that help them to sense what's going on around them. The most important one is that they have 10 eyes. 2 of those eyes are what we call compound eyes. They're very easy to see on the horseshoe crab, and they see kind of like our eyes, but they see more pictures than our eyes do. The other 8 eyes are what we call sensory eyes. They're very similar to the sea star's eyes, where they only really see basic shadows and shapes. The horseshoe crab also has a little pair of appendages that they use to kind of taste the water. That's on the bottom side of the horseshoe crab here, and it makes sure that the water that they're in is okay for them to be in.
Here we have the Atlantic silverside. Usually when you catch these, there'll be a big school of them. A school is a group of fish. They school using their lateral line, this silver line on the side here, hence their name, silverside. These fish have really poor eyesight, so the lateral line is really important. It helps them to detect water pressure, find prey, or escape a predator. Today you learned all about the 5 senses: hearing, sight, touch, smell, and taste, and how the animals of the Long Island Sound have used them to adapt to their environment.
Just like humans, the animals of the Long Island Sound rely on their senses to keep themselves safe. Whether it's just the sensory eyes of the sea star or the lateral line of the Atlantic silverside, all these adaptations help to keep them away from predators and help them find their food. Each of the animals we collected in our trawl net today has a special role in the Long Island Sound ecosystem. Each has a place in the food chain where some animals rely on it for food and others rely on it as predators to maintain population size. They have special body systems to help digest their food and also to transport nutrients around. And they've adapted different ways to sense the environment around them and to move around as well. All of these adaptations these animals have developed help them survive and thrive in the Long Island Sound. Thanks for coming aboard the Schooner SoundWaters. I had so much fun exploring the Long Island Sound with you. Hope to see you again soon on another SoundWaters virtual field trip.